So you need to know the different factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis. So those factors that affect the rate we call limiting factors. So these are called limiting factors. And the best way to think about it, which I've drawn already, is if I had a barrel, so imagine this was a barrel. Okay, it's not a very good picture, my drawing skills aren't great, but it will do. So if I put water into the top of this barrel, you could see that here with this one, this is the lowest edge of the barrel. So here's the different sides of the barrel. This one is the lowest. So I would only be able to, at the moment, fill my barrel to that line because water would then flow over because that's the lowest point. Okay, so at this point here, carbon dioxide is my limiting factor. There's plenty of light, there's plenty of temperature, you know, temperature's good, there's plenty of water in the environment, but actually I can only go this far with my reaction, and the carbon dioxide is my limiting factor. If I then were in a situation where I was able to give more or provide more carbon dioxide, okay, so now I've added more carbon dioxide, now what's happened is light is now my limiting factor because I put water in here. Now I can raise my rate up to that point, and light is the thing now that I can't go beyond. So light is my limiting factor. So we can draw that on a graph, and this is how they might give it to you in your exam. Okay, you've got your graph, and let's say we were doing light. Okay, so you have light increasing along the x-axis, and then you have the rate of photosynthesis on the y-axis. And as mine here, okay, with my barrel picture here, as I increase light, my rate will increase. When it's dark, there's not going to be any photosynthesis, but as I increase my concentration of light or the amount of light, the rate of photosynthesis increases, and it gets more and more and more and more until all of a sudden it levels off. And at this point here, that's the same as me reaching this point here. I could add more and more and more and more and more light, but it makes no difference whatsoever because I can't make my reaction go any faster, because now all of a sudden something else has taken over as the limiting factor. So at this point here, light is limiting. But at this point here, light is no longer limiting, and now something else has taken over. So let's say back on my barrel here, my light is my limiting factor to there, and then if my light were raised, say it were raised to there, all of a sudden it's no longer light that's limiting. Now it's either my carbon dioxide or it's my temperature, whichever of those were the lowest. Okay, so light is no longer limiting. So they could give you this graph for any of the different limiting factors. So obviously if you take away carbon dioxide, if you take away water, photosynthesis is going to slow down and stop. If you take away light, of course, photosynthesis will slow down and stop. And the temperature will also cause the rate of reaction to slow, and if it's really cold, then of course it would stop. So they could give you a graph with any of these, and where it's increasing, it's always that thing that is limiting. So in this instance, it's light, and when it flattens out, something else has now become the limiting factor. Okay, so let's have a look at how that works in reality. So if you went on a mountain, and you looked at the top of a mountain, you would find plants such as Edelweiss. And Edelweiss is quite a small plant. Okay, and it's small because one, it's cold. So that means that photosynthesis can't be its maximum because it's too cold, and also because there is less CO2 as you go up into the atmosphere. There's less particles in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is less dense. So there's less carbon dioxide around. So because of this, it limits the size that plants can grow. And so what farmers will do, or what gardeners will do, is if they're trying to maximise crop production, they will have, you know, their greenhouse, and that greenhouse there'll be plenty of water here, so they have their plants growing. They'll give them plenty of water, so that doesn't limit their growth or limit the rate of photosynthesis. They'll also provide light, maximum light, so that isn't limiting photosynthesis. They'll add maximum carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, and also they will keep the environment at the optimum temperature. And so by doing that, they are maximising the rate of photosynthesis and therefore the rate of growth of plants kept inside that environment. One of those things isn't then stopping or slowing down the rate of photosynthesis. So for the higher tier, you have to be able to add lines to the graphs that we've just looked at with limiting factors. So if I had my graph here, and it showed light intensity as before on the x-axis increasing, and we have rate of photosynthesis here on the y-axis again increasing. If we were to draw our graph say at 20 degrees, okay, we would have here our light intensity would be our limiting factor here, as we've talked about before, and then when the light intensity has leveled off, or when the rate of photosynthesis, has leveled off, we know that at this point here something else has become the limiting factor. But in an exam they might ask you to draw on or add a line to show the rate of reaction at a higher temperature, for instance. So were we to perform this at a higher temperature, we would have an increased rate of reaction. So our line is still going to start at 0, because no light means no photosynthesis, but it's going to increase because it's hotter and there's more energy in the system. It's going to increase at a higher rate, and it will level off above our initial line. So this would be our 30-degree rate. So you would just need to add a new line to your graph. And what we say is, when we look at this, that at this region here, okay, this area is referred to as directly proportional. Can't spell. Directly proportional, because as light intensity increases, the rate of photosynthesis also increases. So as light intensity increases, so does the rate. It also increases. And so we have a linear relationship between these. So this is similar to you will have looked at in maths. We have a linear relationship because this here is a straight line. And as one of them increases, so here the light intensity increases, the rate increases by the same proportion. Okay, so if light intensity went up by 1%, rate might also always increase by 1%. Or if light intensity went up by 1%, rate might increase always by 2%. There's always the same proportion of increase from one to the other. That means that they are therefore directly proportional. So on the higher tier, one thing they could ask you, and this would be as part of the mathematical element of the question paper, is they can ask you about the inverse square law. Now the inverse square law is used when we're looking at light intensity and being able to calculate light intensity. So if I had, for instance, some pondweed, okay, so if I've got a test tube, and in my test tube I've got some pondweed, and I could look at, or I could count the number of bubbles given out by my pondweed to look at the rate of photosynthesis. If I had a light here shining, okay, onto my pondweed, I could measure my rate of photosynthesis with this level of light intensity. I could move my lamp further away, okay, and then of course as it's moved further away it would be darker, and so then I would have a different rate of photosynthesis, and my light intensity now is lower, okay, because it's further away, so it's a little bit darker. And I can do that, I can work out the intensity, the light intensity of my new position by using the inverse square law. And what I use is I use this equation, okay? So the intensity I of the new position equals the intensity of the original position times the distance squared of the original position divided by the distance squared of the new position. Okay, so let's have an example of using this equation. So let's say I did this experiment as before, and the distance from my light to my pondweed at this point here was 0.25 meters, and then I moved my lamp further away, and the distance for my new lamp was 0.5 meters further away. And then let's say I already had my value of light intensity at my original position here, and my light intensity at this point here had a value of 80 lux. And we measure light intensity in lux. And so I can put this into my equation. So my light intensity of my new position here is my light intensity of my original position, so that's 80, times by my distance of my original squared, so that's 0.25 squared, divided by the distance of my new position, so 0.5 squared. And so that comes to 80 times 0.0625 divided by 0.25. So 0.25 squared is 0.0625 and 0.5 squared is 0.25. So if I pop that into my calculator, so here's my calculator. So 80 times 0.0625 equals, it comes to 5 divided by 0.25 divided by 0.25, and that gives me an answer of 20, and don't forget the units, lux. So that means that my light intensity at this original position here was 80 lux, and as I moved my light further away it moved to 20 lux. And what's happened here, what that shows us is that my light intensity is inversely proportional, and it's inversely proportional to the new distance squared. Okay, so my light intensity is inversely proportional to the new distance squared. Okay, so let's have a look at an example of what this means in practice. So that means that if I have my lamp and I double the distance from the plant, okay, so like I did with this one here, I've doubled the distance. If the distance is doubled, my light intensity changes, and it changes inversely proportional to the new distance squared. So inversely proportional means 1 divided by, and the new distance squared, so I've doubled it, so it would be 2 squared. which gives me a quarter. So that means that my light intensity is now a quarter of the original value. If, however, my distance is halved, okay, my value is still inversely proportional, so I do 1 divided by, and this time I do 1 divided by a half squared, which is the same as 1 divided by a quarter. And in maths, when you do fractions, if you're dividing by fractions, remember you flip this one over and then you multiply it. So that would be 1 times 4 divided by 1. I've flip that one over, so that gives me an answer of 4. So that means if I half my distance, my light intensity is now 4 times greater. So if I moved my lamp from here to here, I would increase my light intensity 4 times. And that's right, we know that this is working because here my light intensity was 20, I halved the distance and it moves to 80. 4 times 20 is 80. Going back the other way, if I'm double the distance here, I've quartered my light intensity.